Good afternoon, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're having a good day. I know you could have chosen to be anywhere at this moment, so I thank you for being here with us. If you don't mind, I'd like to do something that I usually do before most of my presentations, and that's take a selfie with the crowd. So I do this, if you give me just a moment, I do this in a different way.
Voiceover on. Camera. 0 faces.
Okay, let's see.
Landscape. 0 faces. 1 face. Small face. Face near bottom edge. 1 face.
Okay,
0
perfect.
face. 0 face. Voiceover off.
Thanks for letting me do that. So what I did there was I enabled VoiceOver, which is an assistive technology called a screen reader, and it enables persons that are low vision, allows them to use the device. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, why would somebody that's blind want to use a touch device? It's really for the same reason that you do. It's to communicate with people. Probably asking yourself, why would somebody that's blind want to take a selfie or a picture? And the answer is the same, for the same reason, to share with their friends and family, right? So I just like to do that just to inspire you. You know, there's really, with just a little bit of ingenuity and creativity and empathy, that you can make experiences for everyone. So let me introduce myself. My name is Gerard K. Cohen, and I am the lead accessibility strategist for the Wells Fargo Digital Solutions for Business, and I sit on the Customer Insights and Experience Design team. My contact information is up on the screen here. And as a accessibility specialist, I worked with interaction designers, visual designers, I work with product owners, I worked with content writers, I work with developers and QA testers as well to make sure that the web applications that we're producing are accessible to people with disabilities. It's something that's really important for us as business providers because we firmly believe that our users expect and deserve the same experiences as everyone else. Thank you. I want to start off actually by telling you a story real quick that happened to me and my wife recently this year. We were trying to take advantage of our health and wellness dollars, our benefits that provide dollars, by taking a biometric exam at a very well-known large drugstore. And we went to their website to sign up, and it wasn't working all week. So we decided, you know what, we'll just show up Saturday morning, and we will just get there early and try to beat the crowd. And when we got there, we were presented with a kiosk, and it was a touch kiosk, and it was very unresponsive. And so it took us a really long time to get through the 40 pages of screens, literally 40 pages of questions and things to read. And it was really slow. So what would happen is we would tap next, and it would take about 10 seconds for it to get to the next screen. So no exaggeration, it took us about 15 minutes to get through this sign-up process. I was patient enough. I understood how the systems work, and I really wanted to be seen. So I just went ahead and finished off the process, sat down, and then witnessed people come in and struggle the same way. A lot of times they would just give up and leave. So the interesting thing about this sign-up system was that it would not allow you to set an appointment an hour before the doctor's lunch break, which was at noon. And so I witnessed a lady walk in at about 10:50, and by the time she got to the end of the process, it was after 11, and at that point it's when it told her, sorry, we can't make an appointment for you. She was gonna need to wait 2 hours to try to make an appointment again. She just left. So we sat there, and of course the appointments were running late, and I was pretty sure that we weren't gonna be seen. The doctor came out, and I'm pretty certain she was gonna tell us that she wasn't gonna be able to see us at that moment. But I think she saw the look on my face because I was really hungry because I had been fasting for 24 hours. And she knew that if she didn't see me right then, I would probably waste my fast and have to come back another day if I decided to come back. So she did us the favor. She went ahead and stayed behind and saw us and a couple other people, and I was very thankful to her for that. So I tell you this story really to point out the fact that we had used 2 automated systems that were built for our convenience, but in the end, they actually ended up failing us. And the only thing that saved that experience for us was the human, was the doctor herself. Now, I know this is a tech conference, and we're all excited about artificial intelligence and machine learning and virtual and augmented reality, but I'm here to remind you all, please, don't forget the humans, okay? When we're talking about designing for the human experience, you have to be very intentional. You have to be very intentional about designing for the human experience. A lot of times, what happens is we focus on a lot of the technological advances, but we don't remember who it is we're providing them for. So I mentioned a lot about design. I use the word design a lot, and a lot of you may not necessarily have the word design in your job title. But I'm here to tell you that if you have any kind of decision-making or impact on the user experience, you in fact are a designer. Okay, you may be an engineer, or you may be a copywriter or a copy editor, but you have a very big role on the impact of the user experience, so that makes you a designer. And I know that a lot of real designers don't like to hear that, but it's not all just about, pushing pixels and, or sketch files. So if you can agree with me, at least for this presentation, that the fact that you make decisions that impact user experience makes you a designer, then there's one thing that I want you to always ask yourself when you are making these decisions that impact the user experience. And that important question is, who are you leaving out? If you're not intentional about the way you design for your users, then you're probably going to be leaving somebody out. If you're working on the next speech recognition technology, you have to make sure that it works for people with accents or speech impairments, right? If you're working on any kind of biometric technology like retina scans, you have to make sure that you account for different ethnicities and different face shapes. Not everyone has a perfect face like mine. Thank you. So you need to be very intentional, again, about the human experience there. So when we're talking about the human experience, if you're not designing for and accounting for everyone, you're probably leaving somebody out, right? And you're probably only designing for some people. So we like to say when user experience doesn't consider all users, it should be called some user experience, or SUX, sucks. You don't want your startup to suck. You want to be able to impact the world and be the next paradigm-shifting technology. And the absolute best way to do that is to uplift and improve the human experience. So to inspire you, what I'm going to do is spend a few minutes to talk about some very important innovations and people that have helped change the world. The first one, and probably the biggest, the reason why we're all here, is the internet. And I'd like to first introduce you to Mr. Vint Cerf, who is the father of the internet. And he's the father of the internet because in 1979, he invented the TCP/IP protocol, which is basically the backbone for internet communications. And in 1982, he invented the first commercial email system for MCI. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but up in his picture here, he's actually wearing a hearing aid, and that's because he was hard of hearing. He is hard of hearing, actually, and his wife is completely deaf. So his motivation for creating the internet communications that we all thrive off of was just so that he can communicate basically with his wife. He's on record very recently as saying, it's almost criminal that programmers have not had their feet held to the fire to build interfaces that are accommodating for people with vision problems or hearing problems or motor problems. It's cut off there at the end. Another important person is Tim Berners-Lee, who's actually known as the father of the World Wide Web. He invented what we know as the World Wide Web in 1989. In 1990, he invented the first browser and first web server. And in 1994, he founded the World Wide Web Consortium, which is the W3C. It's the International Standards Organization for the Web. He was also noted as the 100 most important people of the 20th century in 1999 by Time magazine. He's very famously quoted as saying, the power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. This is going to be interesting. So this is Satya Nadella. He's the CEO of Microsoft. And he says, as we talk about technology, one of the things we need to, in particular as technologists and decision makers, is to keep in mind the timeless values that drive what we do. How are we going to use technology to empower people? We definitely want to improve productivity and efficiency, but he says not at the expense of humanity. He also goes on to say, we must make Microsoft products accessible to the more than 1 billion people globally of all abilities. This is a shared goal of the company. Universal design is central to how we realize our mission and will make all our products better. Now, it's not a coincidence that he uses the word universal design there. I've introduced you to two very well-known figures known as the fathers of the internet, but I just wanted to point out that on the stage we actually have the mother of universal design, and you'll be hearing from her in a few minutes. Lastly is Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, and he says, for us, we believe very deeply that accessibility is a human right, and we try very hard to make all of our products accessible for everyone. Because of that is a basic value. So again, as a startup, you want to aspire to make a change, to improve human user experience. And so I'm going to go over a few things real quick to help you think about this in depth. You may not understand what I'm talking about at the moment, and that's okay, but just promise me you'll take notes and look them up later on. The first very important key to think about is color. Think about the colors that you're choosing for your brand. Facebook, a lot of people don't know this, Facebook is blue because Mark Zuckerberg is actually colorblind. He can't see in red or green. And colorblindness is actually pretty common. I believe 10 to 12% of men have some form of colorblindness. And colorblindness doesn't necessarily mean that you're seeing in grayscale, although in the most extreme case it can. But what it means is that you just can't see certain colors as vivid as others. Dropbox just very recently released a whole new rebranding effort, and one of the things they did was made sure to change the hue of their logo to make sure it stands out from all the other colors they support for this reason. Next thing is think about small text and small interface elements, because you never know where things are going to be displayed. Make sure that your interface elements are large enough to notice and to interact with. Don't always assume that someone's using a fine motor pointing device like a mouse or even a finger, or just any other typical way of input. You don't want to assume that, that just because someone's using a touch device, that it's a mobile device, because we do have desktops and laptops that have touch interfaces, as well as kiosks in drugstores. You also don't want to assume that just because someone is using a keyboard that they're on a desktop or a laptop, because you can use Bluetooth keyboards on mobile devices as well. So the point is, don't assume. You have to account for all of it. You need to give everybody options. Next thing, captions and transcripts. If you're producing videos, having captions for those videos are extremely important, because you never know where those videos are being consumed. I could be in a loud place and unable to hear what's going on in the video, or I could be in a quiet place and not want to disturb everyone around me. I oftentimes am watching those tasty videos on Facebook while I'm in meetings, so it's nice to be able to see those recipes. But if you think about it, a chef who's hard of hearing, their livelihood depends on getting those recipes. So providing captions is extremely helpful to people with hearing impairments. And if you're providing captions, you're not that far away from providing transcripts. And transcripts are really important for podcasts, so if you're producing any podcasts, it's nice to have those transcripts. But also having that text available on the page is really good for your SEO as well. Agile, so I'm assuming everybody here is a tech startup, so you're probably some kind of agile shop. You want to make sure that accessibility is built into your process, right? Your user stories include accessibility, and your definition of done also includes accessibility. You can't close and ship something until it's accessible. This is very important. Performance is extremely critical to user experience, okay? It doesn't matter how pretty it is. It doesn't even matter how accessible or usable it is. If a user can't get to it because it's too slow, or if it takes too long to go from screen to screen, it's going to frustrate somebody, okay? Don't let your engineers, or if you're an engineer, don't let your ego fall into the trap in thinking that more complex code is better. It's not like cheese or bacon, you know, the more you add, the better it gets. It's not like that. Okay, over-engineering something is the best way to slow performance. Lastly, and probably most importantly, is you want to make sure you're hiring the right people. Okay, hiring someone that is specializing in accessibility and inclusive and universal design is just as important as hiring that ninja developer or that rock star designer. In fact, I'd probably go on record as saying that they're probably not that ninja or rock star if they don't already have some kind of empathy or accessibility experience. And if you can't find people with those skills, don't be afraid to get training. There's a lot of good organizations that will help you train to get these skills. Basically, it all comes back down to the humans, as I mentioned in the beginning. So the reason why this is important, especially as business owners, is 22% of the world's population has some form of disability, okay? And that's a lot of people to leave out. You may be asking yourself, hey, Gerard, that sounds really hard and expensive. But so is artificial intelligence and machine learning and all that stuff. We're all innovators, we're all problem solvers here, so I'm sure you can work it out. So essentially, just in summary, if you remember nothing else, just remember, please don't forget the humans. So I'm going to pass this over to my esteemed colleague here, who is an American industrial designer, gerontologist, and author. She has been recognized by ID Magazine as one of the 40 most socially conscious designers in the world. In 2000, she was selected by a consortium of news editors and organizations as one of the 100 most important women in America. ABC World News featured her as one of the 50 Americans defining the new millennium. It's with great esteem and pleasure that I introduce you to Patricia Moore.
Good afternoon. Should I press again, or are you pulling up my presentation?
While they're working that out, I'll give her a minute. I forgot to mention I actually grew up here in Glendale. I'm a product of the Glendale Unified School District. I went to Edison Elementary. I went to Roosevelt Junior High and Hoover High School. As a kid, I actually my mother, who's out in the crowd right now, used to bring me to this very theater to watch movies. And so it's kind of cool to be able to walk around backstage. And also, today's my 40th birthday, so I feel it's very special for me to be here today. So thank you.
Thanks for the stretch. Very nicely done. It's difficult for me in a life that's been so richly blessed to just give you 15 minutes of overview, but here we go. I want to introduce you to my boyfriends. You boys are really getting beat up in the press these days, and I have to tell you, as a woman in a male world, I have been surrounded by tremendous mentors. I was also hit upon many, many times, and being very Irish and from Buffalo, New York, I hit first and apologize later. I don't say that out of humor, but rather out of survival. I do have friends who have been raped and brutalized, and I work all over the world trying to help little girls live in a world gone mad. Today is the International Day of the Girl, and I welcome you, please, to go to the UN site and read about how we're trying to save little girls from the crises that they face every day. But let me go back to my boyfriends. I don't know if you recognize this fine fellow, but I met him when I went off to university. Does anyone need me to read for you? If you do, I will. Just wave. Okay, I'll let you read for yourselves. Elvin was a beloved friend, and it was very hard to wish him adieu, but I think he's saving me a good seat in heaven now. And if you haven't read this book, if you don't sleep with this book, please get a copy. That's what Amazon is for. This is another one of my very important boyfriends. I love this guy because he's one of the greatest minds in architecture and design, and he never graduated from university. You can't do that anymore. But he was able to achieve that long ago. Victor was the man who introduced me to the fact that consumers all over the world deserve, with equity, our creativity and innovation. And sadly, we have yet to accomplish that, but we shouldn't put our head on the pillow without thinking about everybody as equal. And again, this needs to be in your library. And this is my big-time boyfriend. This was my first boss, my first job. And you might know him as the father of industrial design. How lucky am I? Raymond Loewy hired me when I was a sophomore at university, the Rochester Institute of Technology. When I was called to the dean's office, I wondered what I had done now. And there were a bunch of suits waiting to talk to me. I was told if I kept my grades up, I was going to be hired by Mr. Loewy, and my first job would be to be embedded in the USSR. And I can't tell you much more than that. Mr. Loewy wrote a wonderful book, Never Leave Well Enough Alone. But he taught us daily on the job. He was a tremendous mentor and grandfather and friend. And he said, as I was hired to be the only woman amongst 350 male designers and architects, you can do it. And this man remarkably came to me in the 6th grade in a reading list from the Sisters of Mercy. They're kind of like men. They're really tough gals, and I had a great education with them. This man taught me about empathy. And if you've never read Black Like Me, get your tissue box ready. Black Like Me changed my career. Alongside my grandfather, my favorite grandpa, and the meanest dog ever born, Mr. Magoo. It was my grandfather who taught me as a little girl the importance of lifespan as a consideration in design. I was 26 when I put to play what I had learned growing up with my grandfather in our home. It was empathy and understanding and consideration and kindness. But I did it thanks to Barbara Kelly, a makeup designer at Saturday Night Live, where my entire body was prosthetically altered so that even though I was 26, I lived as 85. I traveled the US and Canada for nearly 4 years, visiting 116 cities in 9 different guises representing every level of health and social status. I was treated beautifully. I was attacked and beaten by a gang and left for dead. I was shortchanged in shops, and taxi drivers wouldn't let me pay for my fare. I found love in a gentleman who brought me chamomile tea in Central Park, along with cookies that he made himself. And I said goodbye to far too many new friends. And the end of it all was the birth of universality in design, where we work together to hold hands throughout the universe, using design as the great equalizer, so that with an inclusive agenda, we care for each and every one of ourselves as equal. Whether it's the beginning of your life or its end. Now we have an agenda that's being called aging in place, which doesn't mean we become statuary, but rather we should have autonomy and independence thanks to design. Our homes need to be considerate of the fact that what we're able to do today, we might not be able to do tomorrow. I'm walking with a stick because in February I was struck by an automobile while crossing the street in Wellington, New Zealand. After 4 months in the hospital, I transferred from wheelchair to walker and now a cane. And they saved my leg. It's cadaver bone and plastic and steel now, but I have a leg, and I'm very grateful for that. A lot of the work we're doing now, of course, is looking at how we can build a smart environment, not just our homes, but our communities too. You'll notice this woman is sort of pushing her head back. That's the tell. It's like a poker game. If you show a consumer a new screen, a new product interface, and you see the head go back like that, they can't see it. They're trying to see it. They're trying to focus. And I won't name the product, but you can probably see the brand. It's a shame. A lot of money goes into this hardware design, and not a lot of thought. All of us need tools for everyday living so that we can manage ourselves, not selfishly, but selflessly. I've never met an elder who just didn't want to be able to do as much as possible for themselves. They don't want to be a burden. They're always the first to give you their cookie instead of you going without. So let's honor our elders by recognizing their needs. And let's manage technology so that it hugs us instead of hurting us. Let's recognize that all the whiz-bang of science, while wondrous and remarkable, is creating a digital divide. My mother has a PhD in mathematics, and she's never used a computer, and she can barely use a mobile phone. She finds it intimidating because she's mostly blind, and she doesn't find it a comfort as a consumer. And so the babies born today are going to be born to things we can only imagine. But let us not forget our elders and people in economies around the world that do not have the means by which to take advantage of the things we do each day. That's the humanistic side of the marvels of our lives. Now, I grew up with Rosie the robot, and I always thought that potentially that was a nice future. But as things have evolved, it's not going well. So I'm here to tell you, as I tell bright minds all over the world, this is not how I want to be cared for in my future. I know exactly what I want. I want Captain Jack. I think Johnny Depp as Captain Jack as my personal robot will be a slice of heaven on this earth. I'm sure of it. I'm rehearsing it in my mind daily. And when my male nurse, who looked like Dwayne Johnson, introduced himself to me in Wellington, New Zealand, I wished I had been hit by a bus. Because there was no way I wanted this gorgeous man covered in his Fijian tattoos to potty me and bathe me, but he did. I am still recovering from that. Not just healthcare, but everything about our daily lives has to be holistic and humane. So I'll leave you with one final great thinker. And maybe a cautionary quote from John Adams. There has never been a democracy that hasn't committed suicide. Reread The Time Machine. Listen to the brightest minds on the planet. When asked what we need to survive, Professor Hawking said, empathy. It's missing. We have to embrace it. We have to look around us and see all ages, all levels of ability, and push for the time and the budget to be responsible to all people as equal, because that's why we're here. That's why we're the brightest buttons in the room. I have expectations for a good, long life. And when I'm 85 again, I hope it's because of your good heads and hearts. And Captain Jack. Thank you very much.
So I think we have a little bit of time for any questions that the crowd may want to ask. If not, me and Patricia will just talk. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's my 65th.
Yeah, all right.
It's all month. I'm celebrating all month.
Yeah.
Hi, Patricia. I'm actually an industrial designer myself, and I think it's amazing that you worked with Raymond Loewy, and I just wanted to hear just what kind of projects you worked on with him, and if any of your, or any projects that concerned universal design started there, or was that much later in your career?
We didn't talk about universal design when I first arrived in '74, but Mr. Loewy was of an age that as I started talking around it without the terminology, he totally agreed. The moment that was my tipping point came in a meeting for one of the Soviet Union product designs, and that was a refrigerator. And what he did was to hire someone from one of the major brands to come into the New York office to design a refrigerator. And I was a little confused that we were just putting another unit into the marketplace without much research or development. So I asked if we couldn't consider a way to open and close the refrigerator door that didn't require our hand grasping a handle and pulling the door open. And I told the story of the day I heard my grandmother cry out in the pain of her arthritis, keeping her from doing such a simple motion. And that was the beginning of her end. She could no longer cook, and being very Irish, she just decided it was better to go to heaven. Within the year, she was gone, and I think she died of a broken heart, not because she was broken, but the products in her home were broken. They didn't meet her physical needs. In bringing that story into the Loewy boardroom, though, what I got were groans and moans, and my male counterparts saying, "Patty, we do not design for those people." That was my bumper sticker. If we weren't designing for those people, who would be? We were the greatest firm in the world. We were the IDEO of the time. And so I started writing and researching and talking about it, and Mr. Loewy liked the thought behind it. We started pushing for more of a focus on the broadest use possible. And then after I went into character, we hit on the whole idea of inclusive design and universality. So I think anything I worked on at Loewy was looking through the lens of the eyes of my grandparents. And now, of course, you know, as a designer, this is what we do all the time, as much as possible. So make me Johnny Depp as Captain Jack.
I'm on it.
Okay, thank you.
So Patricia, it's actually interesting that you say that you heard the response of we don't design for those people. That's something that we still deal with today. If you imagine at the beginning, if the engineers had thought, basically asked the questions that I had asked, you know, those people don't want to take pictures, those people don't want to use current technology. What we have to remember is that those people is us. It's us. We're those people. And specifically for my field of work, when we talk about disabilities, we often consider people that have disabilities as if they've only been born with them, but we never think about people developing disabilities. And the thing about user experience is that user experience in life, it changes. As Patricia mentioned, you know, we have to be concerned about our elders because I don't want to sound morbid, but you know, we're all one accident or one illness away from developing some disability. Now, God forbid something like that happen. If we can make it to old age, I hope I do. But I'll probably start to, you know, it'll probably be a little bit harder for me to hear, a little bit harder for me to hear, a little bit slower for me to move. So the human experience changes, and if we constantly consider those people, then we might find ourselves being in a position where we've outdesigned ourselves. And that's something that we don't want to get caught up in.
One of the things I always try and do is to watch my language very carefully. And so whether I'm training students or working with a client, we never talk about disabilities, but rather we try really hard to make the obvious point that each of us here today has some level of capacity. Some of us need reading glasses, some of us need a stick, some of us need a drink. Come on, these are the jokes. I know that's a bad one, but I shouldn't joke about it. My friends with alcoholism say it's okay. So I think what I'm saying is we have to be lighthearted. But in focusing on a person's capacity, I can honestly tell you, I have never designed for what someone can't do. So we don't talk about designing for disabilities, we talk about designing for abilities. And I think if maybe we make that slight change in our language, it might help. Some days I wake up and I think we're lost, because I'm also a child of the 60s. I was a hippie. I remember crying when President Kennedy was assassinated. I remember being joyous when President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. And I still feel dreadfully as a Caucasian that my friends who are not feel they don't have equity in this great nation. And so I will fight to the death for that too. But I'd rather focus on what's right about us and not what is missing or something that doesn't exist. And so I think if we just make that little bit of a tweak, it will help. And it helps us to remember that accessibility is a piece of what we do, but inclusivity is beyond just mobility. It's all things that we use as consumers being addressed by design. Or I could be wrong.
Well, no, actually, language is a really big part of it. Definitely, you know, we have a term called ableist language, right? And so in my field of work, we oftentimes use the word disability because we focus on a certain set. And a lot of times the people that we work with, they're not ashamed. In fact, we're trying to change the language to use a more inclusive term of diverse abilities, because really we all just, as I mentioned, we're all different. We all have diverse abilities and different ways of doing things. So language is definitely a big part of it. It just is just as much as anything else.
I was on the team that wrote the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I was the only one in the room that felt it was important to call it the American Abilities Act. Everyone kept saying, no, these are people with disabilities. And they know that. We don't have to have the Disabilities Act. We have to have an Abilities Act, which means we're meeting the needs of all ability levels as equal. To that end, we fought very hard, because the ADA is, after all, an employment act, to get people the right to the job they wanted. And so on 9/11, as I wept on my knees in my apartment in New York, watching what was unfolding, I have to tell you, I felt completely guilty that I tried so hard and fought so hard for people to be able to get the job they wanted and to wheel into those towers, but I never considered how to get them out. It will haunt me till the day I die.
We have a question over here.
Thank you. My mommy made me. It's true. Patricia Rose is great, my beloved mommy.
She did a good work.
Thank you. I'll tell her. She's 89 in December, and sometimes she wonders. I mean, about me.
I was curious to hear a little bit about your position at Wells Fargo. I've never heard of a position where someone was exclusively dealing with accessibility and pertaining to digital, and I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure, it's definitely kind of a niche market at this time, because oftentimes, especially with technology and web usage, we often just don't think of people outside of our experiences. We have to constantly remind ourselves that we are not the user. And so right now it's important to have somebody that's educated and is understanding and empathetic with those things, but my biggest job is just evangelizing and exposing it to everybody else to make sure that I'm not the only one in the room that's tasked with that. It's really everybody's responsibility. We often talk about, I mentioned agile, that's one of the big definitions for agile, is that the shipping of a product is everybody's responsibility. You may have specific tasks or skills, but it's everyone's responsibility to get that thing out the door. And my job is to remind everyone that, there's people that are not like you. And I expose the other side to things.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, I think we're out of time, so thank you very much for spending this time with us.